recent video, we discussed the idea of sequencing a sequence. And a big reason I wanted to make that point is that sequential voltage can be used to sequence anything in a patch, not just pitch. Of course, the sequence that I did sequence in that video was itself sequencing pitch. In videos, I usually do sequence pitch because it's easy for humans, which comprise over 90% of this channel's viewership, to hear and interpret the results of pitch sequencing. But let's also consider multing the pitch of a sequence and using it to sequence something else at the same time. This is a very popular technique with classic monosynths. It's usually called keyboard tracking when used to modulate a low-pass filter along with the pitch, making higher notes brighter and leading to a more uniform sound across the keyboard. Another common one is the controlling of the LFO rate by the keyboard or sequencer. This too is pretty easy to do with the DPO. In fact, by using follow, we don't even have to mult the voltage. This makes sounds that ebb and flow in timbre in a rhythmic way, just as they ebb and flow in popularity from decade to decade. Both of these patches utilize non-pitched parameters to reinforce the shape of the sequence in our ears. Since the sound changes in multiple audible ways along the same single gestural path that is inscribed by the sequence. I'd like to consider the possibility of this type of technique also helping us in hearing and interpreting multiple voices in a more complex mix. For example, here are two sequences whose gate and CV patterns are identical to each other. A classic technique of so-called minimalist music is to periodically remove and replace one step from one of the sequences so that they go out of phase by one step at a time. This gradual phase shifting causes the sequences to overlap in a way that creates an aural illusion of a single continually changing sequence. That's definitely cool, but I'm curious to see to what degree we can use additional modulation to sort of keep these sequences separated from each other in the moment-to-moment experience of the listener. This is more a question than a statement. I don't necessarily know how successful we'll be here, but perhaps we'll be successful in some way I haven't yet predicted. Let's start by separating them in the stereo field, putting one on the left and the other on the right, using the pan controls of the X-Pan. I'm going to put on my headphones here, and probably so should you. Let's go ahead and do some timbral modulation using multed copies of the sequence. Filter tracking. And wave folder tracking, so to speak. Actually, let's do one better and use the pitch CV to pan them from left to right, so that lower notes are further to the left and higher ones are further to the right. This requires a pretty wide-ranging set of notes to get a dramatic enough CV panning range. Luckily, that's already what we're working with here. But let's boost it a little more by putting the CV through channels 2 and 3 of the maths. And cranking those output attenuverters before we patch it to the pan CV inputs. I don't know about you, but my ears are not used to the bass being on one side and the treble being on the other. Some records were mixed that way in the early days of stereo, but it sounds really lopsided to me today. So I'm gonna invert one of these panning channels and turn the pan control up so the bass parts of the two channels are on opposite sides of the mix. Let's run them through the mimeophone too. The thing I really like about using sounds with stereo motion like this in mimeophone is that each note echoes in the same spatial location it was originally heard. As long as we aren't using ping pong or skew. It can give a little more precise definition to the stereo image. So were we successful in separating these sequences and giving them individual identities in our ears? It's hard to say. The mix began to gel together for me, but in a way where it maybe had a little more effective motion than if the sequences had been controlling only pitch. Do you patch sequences like this? Do you mult one sequence to pitch and also to other parameters? Do you skip pitch entirely? What do you sequence? Let us know in the comments.